murder somebody on the way to it.
Well, because he gave her a shilling to get beside her.
Oh, okay, there is a whole story. He gave her, and she
And
spent
she was
it.
supposed to walk goodbye until that night to get on beside her she wanted.
That's right.
Nothing candid about it.
But then we thought maybe we should get our orders in.
Yeah. Right, it is ready for the job.
Yeah.
So.
A very, very good afternoon to you all and a warm welcome to this warm church, but it's not quite as hot as it was, so for that we give much thanks. And how lovely to see so many here to celebrate the life of someone I think we all loved, dear Joyce Halliday. I'm going to read the sentence because this is a Christian service and Joyce had a very deep and real faith. Since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so through Jesus, God will bring with him those who have died. So we will be with the Lord forever. Therefore, encourage one another with these words. Alan and the family asked me to conduct this Thanksgiving service for Joyce today, and it is my great pleasure and privilege to do so. Some of you may know that I was a GP at Williton Surgery just down the road until my retirement, and indeed I was Joyce's doctor for many years. I don't think, I've kind of been asking her, and I don't think she'll mind me telling you this story. I don't think it'll be breaching confidentiality. It is a story against myself. Once Joyce came to see me with a most unusual rash. It looked like small blood blisters all over her body. I had only once before seen a similar rash in another patient, and he turned out to have terminal blood cancer. I think Joyce must have seen the look on my face, and I'm sure she had a very worrying few days waiting for an urgent appointment to see the consultant haematologist. If I had been a bit wiser and more experienced, I might have known that such a rash can also be caused by a simple allergic reaction, and Joyce might have been spared those days of anxiety. Nowadays, she would probably have had a telephone consultation with a clinician, or even an NHS 111 call handler, and most likely been fobbed off with a prescription for antihistamines, which ironically would have been the correct treatment. I did apologise to Joyce afterwards, and she reassured me and forgave me in her usual kindly manner. But I still cringe when I think about it. We're going to do what we always have to do, which is to hear some instructions from Joyce.
Well, okay, first of all, welcome to everyone, both to all my family, but also from all my family, because there's quite a few of my family here, but I think there's rather more of the rest of you. Thanks very much for coming. And as David did say, I'm very pleased the weather isn't quite what we were expecting. I would very much hope to chat with all of you later. However, if I don't get round you all, and if I forget your names, then I'm sorry in advance. I do have some other distractions, not least my own 5 grandchildren, 5 of Joyce's, 5 of Joyce's great-grandchildren. As well as the locals, I see we've got people here from the United States, we've got people come from Canada, we have people from France. If I've missed any other further afield places, do let me know afterwards, but I think that was it. I was going to say we also have representatives of Joyce's favourite charities, but I know that one at the last minute couldn't make it. However, I'm hoping the other one is here. See you later. Mum moved up to Scotland at the end of 2019. If you remember, at the end of 2019, that was the last full year where we didn't have a pandemic. I think it probably was in the nick of time she moved up, because if she'd been living down here alone, I think perhaps one of us would have had to come down and live. Because although she'd been doing really well, in fact, not many years before that, she was still driving her car. Not long before that, she was still riding a bike around the village. Not that I saw it, but I did hear about it. But she was starting to feel her age, so yes, we moved her up to near us in Scotland, not far from Fintorn Bay. I don't know if any of you know the Murray Coast. And the timing was good in many ways. In some ways, she didn't get to know quite as many people as she would have liked because COVID struck, but she was getting to know people. What she did like was the ducks. She loved the ducks in the park across from where she lived. Although whether the ducks particularly liked the brand of carrot cake that she was buying for them, which was a very, very cheap carrot cake from the local spar shop, and certainly for human consumption it was pretty inedible. I think the ducks probably felt much the same. But she very much enjoyed walking across there and spent quite a long time across in the park. She also enjoyed the local shops in Forest High Street, her favourites being the newsagents, where she bought all sorts of strange things like plastic wallets, which I'm not quite sure what a 97-year-old wanted with plastic wallets, and I have inherited most of them. And she loved the hardware shop, where she had a thing for little sponge pads for clean dishes. Again, I've inherited quite a few. We've been given some to the local charity shop. What she particularly liked was going out for a coffee and a cake. Somewhere where she could watch people, not watch scenery. She definitely was a people watcher, and she used to point. You consider people in waitresses or people in shops, and sort of ask me what I thought, where I thought they'd come from, or what I thought they were all about, which was interesting. She did remain remarkably fit for a 97-year-old, and it was a long and happy life. And when she died, it was fairly quick from being really pronounced healthy, like a couple of weeks before, to when she died. She died in Dr. Gray's Hospital in Elgin, and that was the 15th of September last year. When she died, of course, we had travel restrictions in place, and as we have family, all around the UK and international, and the restrictions on both, we had a private cremation, and then decided we'd have the celebration here today. Very pleased everyone could come. We chose the 19th of July as a particularly poignant day because it's also my dad's birthday. Mum and Dad moved to Bicknoller in 1977, both very active in the village. But Dad died in 1986. So although my mum wasn't alive for as many years as she lived with my dad afterwards, it was pushing it. I mean, she really, she was a single granny and great granny for a long time. Before she died, she liked to discuss that, what sort of service she might have, when she died. And her instructions were simple, happy occasion. She specified all the singing, all the hymns we're having. She specified the poem, and she specified the Bible verses. So everything was chosen by her. In fact, the Bible verses are also the ones that were said at my father's funeral. So they were chosen by her, so you can't blame me. And so I do hope you enjoy them.
The readings that Granny chose are from Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and Romans chapter 14. A time for everything. There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to uproot. A time to kill, and a time to heal. A time to tear down, and a time to build. A time to mourn, and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones, and a time to gather them. A time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to search, and a time to give up. A time to keep, and a time to throw away. A time to tear, and a time to mend. A time to be silent, and a time to speak. A time to love, and a time to hate. A time for war, and a time for peace. What do workers gain from their toil? I have seen the burden God has laid on the human race. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live. For none of us lives for ourselves alone, and none of us dies for ourselves alone. If we live for the Lord, and if we die for the Lord. So whether we live or die, we belong to the Lord.
When I offered to say a few words at this service, I had no idea that I'd be talking to so many people. But then Joyce knew and touched the lives of a lot of people, so maybe I should have known better. Huh? I would like to thank you all, from me personally, from family and from friends, for being here to participate in this moment of reflection and tribute. If there are a few pregnant pauses, I apologise, but it's going to be difficult to get through this without gulping a little bit, so please put up with me while I take a deep breath and continue. Joyce and Gerard, our mum and dad, had 3 children. I'm here. My sister Elspeth is here. Alan, of course, you know. Mum meant different things to different people. So I hope what I say might reflect in a small way who Mum, Granny, great Granny, Grandma, Auntie, someone here I think, neighbour to a lot of you, but friend to all of us, really was to each of you as individuals and from your own personal memories of her. Mum shunned any form of public recognition. So to respect this is not a eulogy in the conventional sense. Instead, it's just a few of my own personal memories and some family anecdotes, both from Mum's enormously full life. It's impossible to condense almost 98 years of accomplishments into just a few minutes, so I barely scratched the surface of the many things that Mum did achieve. Mum was, of course, Joyce to many of you, but for ease of presentation today, I'm just going to continue to address her as Mum. Mum had a strong social conscience, based on the conviction that, above all else, it's people that matter. So where did the roots of this character originate? Mum was born and spent the early years of her childhood in Halliday in Glasgow. She was born of true Glaswegian stock. Her parents, Daniel MacKay and Agnes MacLean, and all 4 of her grandparents were also Glasgow born and bred. Looking back yet another generation, Alexander Webster was Mum's great-grandfather. Mum didn't actually know him because he died 6 years before she was born. His day job was a Unitarian minister, but he was primarily a political firebrand who fought for and left a strong legacy of social reform in Scotland. He chaired the Scottish Land Restoration League that resisted the enclosure of common land by absentee landlords, and aimed to give access to this common land back to the common people. He was vice president of Keir Hardie's fledgling Labour Party. Scottish Labour Party, sorry. He agitated for women's suffrage alongside the Women's Social and Political Union. He gave numerous speeches and published several pamphlets on the need for social reform and social justice, and was an influential figure in the development of socialism and betterment of living conditions in the city of Glasgow. Moving forward a generation, Mum's grandfather, Grandpa Matthew MacKay, she knew very well. Outwardly, he was a stickler for propriety and tradition. He wore a full, heavy black serge suit and a waistcoat, in a white shirt, a collar, a tie, a breast pocket white handkerchief, and a pure wool black bass berry. Every day of his life, rain, shine, winter, summer. However, he was also the gentlest of men and a favourite of Mum's. And Mum spent many a happy hour listening to his stories. He must have had a good few because he lived for a time in Santander in Spain, and he was fluent in Spanish. And he worked as a clerk with a Glasgow shipping company, which must have brought him into contact with quite a few interesting people. Mum's parents, Daniel and Nessie MacKay, both briefly lived here in Macnaughton until their deaths about 40 years ago. They were also of a gentler and calmer mood than firebrand Alexander Webster, but they were also like-minded people with firm personal convictions on social and humanitarian issues. So, that was the mould. And Mum emerged true to form, and she developed strong views concerning humanitarianism, wow, egalitarianism, and social justice. Though, as we all know, she wasn't a soapbox agitator, and instead had her own quieter ways of following her convictions through caring for others and giving a helping, supporting, and guiding hand where needed. Anyway, when Mum was 7 years old, the family moved from Glasgow down to Mill Hill in West London. Being of good Scots Presbyterian upbringing, the family joined St James's Presbyterian Church in Edgware. And Mum dutifully attended the Sunday school. Mum's Sunday school teacher was a quietly spoken man, whose presentation and demeanour made attending the Sunday school less of a chore than it might have been, but who also had something about him that caught and possibly somewhat diverted Mum's attention from her biblical lessons. By the time when Mum was 14 years old, she decided she would marry this guy. He didn't actually know that at the time. However, 7 years later, she did marry her, but that's jumping the gun a bit, so let me go back a step. Mum finished school in 1942, in Europe in the middle of World War II, and went to university in London to study social science. As London became an increasingly dangerous place to live, she was excavated, that's evacuated. She completed her social studies course and training in 1944 and returned to London, where she was immediately sent to work in Poplar, in the East End. Poplar was a deprived area of enormous need and poverty, so Mum was well and truly thrown into the deep end to use her social science skills. Here, when she wasn't in the underground taking shelter from the bombs, she was actually given lodgings in the original Nonnatus house, which perhaps accounts for her special interest in Call the Midwife, because she spent the winter of 1944 living in the original Nonnatus house. Apparently, it was quite a forbidding place. But to alleviate the rigours of winter and the lack of heating, one of the nuns secretly used to bring Mum a hot water bottle to take the chill off the bed. Mum was so grateful, particularly as the nuns were not allowed such luxuries. So, Mum was working in Poplar, and this bloke she had her eye on was by then on the committee of Manifilla Church, the leader of the Sunday school, the leader of the Lifeboy group and a men's hockey team, working all hours with a pharmaceutical company that was working out to manufacture and supply the drugs and anesthetics needed to sustain the war effort. Frankly, I had no idea how they find the time to get to know each other. But there must have been a will, and they must have found a way, because only 2 months after the war ended, they married in the same St James's Church, where this single-minded Sunday school pupil had first crossed paths with her previous Sunday school teacher, now husband. A couple of years later, Dad moved to a different company, so the family, which now included 2 young children, that was us, relocated from London to Brooklands Park, just north of London, and then to a bungalow in Hartman. This bungalow was the first house Mum and Dad owned together, and coincidentally, it also had a back garden backing onto an open field, just like their final house here together in Bicknell. They barely established themselves in Hartlepool when Dad once again got a more senior job, which took Mum and the family back up to Scotland, but this time to Edinburgh. Now, the general view of the Scots is a people who have a disposition to a frugal and careful use of means. This was certainly true of Mum, especially during the early years of her marriage, though she was probably driven as much by necessity as by nature, as many basic foodstuffs we take for granted today were still rationed or just not available at all. And I well remember that a roast chicken on a Sunday once every 2 months was a real luxury. To help her manage her housekeeping each month, she divided the money into several little boxes. She had a box for food, a box for clothes, a box for shoes, a box for school dinners, a box for bus tickets, a box for birthday presents, and a whole lot of other boxes besides. Her only problem was that to make ends meet each month, she had to borrow money from one box to give it to another box that was getting a bit short. And she left little IOUs. And then just had to hope that another box that was getting a bit short didn't need the money that should have been in the box in the first place. Anyway, she also successfully managed this country trip because somehow we never went hungry and we never went to school bare feet. Anyway, when one gets beyond the frugality cliches, the Scots are open-heartedly generous. And in the words of the folk song penned by the Corries, known for our kind hospitality, a hand that is openly proffered to friends. Mum certainly lived up to these characteristics too. Our house in Edinburgh was a large one, with more space than our family needed. So Mum being Mum, she opened the doors and welcomed people in. Dad's cousin, John Ray, was a minister, and for a time served as chaplain to the British forces stationed in Germany. When his posting in Germany ended, John, his wife, 2 children, and thanks for being here, Anne. Great to see you again. Joined us in our house. The house buzzed with activity, and these were fun times for all of us. In due course, John was appointed to a parish in Baillieston, Glasgow, which, curiously enough, is only 4 miles east of Hag Hill, where Mum was born. During the next few years, Mum welcomed a succession of families, students, friends, and total strangers into our house. James Somerville, my second cousin, who is also here with us today. And it's great to see you again. Hi, James. Spent some time with us. Who else did we have? Cyril, with no relationship to the apple of White's on the same day, was a delightful Sri Lankan man who stayed for a while. Jennifer, an equally pleasant trainee vet. But Col, a personal, as it turned out, somewhat devious person, proved a bit difficult, and eventually had to be asked to leave after having borrowed money from one that wasn't repaid and defaulted on the very little loans. There were several others, but this era came to an end when Mum and Dad downsized to a house of more modest and manageable capacity in a quiet location on the outskirts of Edinburgh. Mum had been only 20 years old when she gained her social sciences diploma and was married with 2 young children only 2 years later. So, other than for a short time working in top work, she'd never subsequently been able to reuse her training in earnest. Although she offered of herself to others in many ways, she still had a hankering to do something a bit more positive. So, when the stream of visitors stopped and Elspeth and I went off to university, this gave her the opportunity she needed, and like us, she also enrolled as a full-time student, this time at Mary House Teacher Training College in Edinburgh. By now, her ability to study and learn was well honed, and her breadth of life experiences, including raising 2 children, gave her a solid grounding in the skills needed to teach. So,
3 children.
oh, by that. I've got 3 here. So, at the end of the first year of the course, she was moved directly on to the 3rd year, which, as you might imagine, she completed with flying colours. Armed with this teaching qualification, Mum once again threw herself in the deep end and secured a teaching job in Craigmillar, a part of Edinburgh where there was a real need and where she felt she could perhaps be of use in the social context as well as just a teacher. Craigmillar, a little bit like Poplar 20 years or so earlier, was a distinctly challenging place to work, especially in school. I think for Mum, teaching was probably the means to an end rather than the end in itself. But Mum's real passion was people and caring for them. So when the opportunity arose to move back to this type of work, she grabbed at it, and she accepted a job at Harmony House. Harmony is a small special school in Edinburgh for children up to 14 years old who come from and are suffering the consequences of disrupted and challenging backgrounds, and who need specialist guidance and support. The aim of the school and my paraphrase here from the current school website, is to see the children in harmony, understand their trauma, regulate their behaviour, and grow their resilience in order to move past the reasons they're there and form healthy attachments and relationships in later life. Now that's quite a tall order, and the staff have to be of a very special nature and temperament. It's the sort of place where at any moment the slightest provocation can flare into violence, and pencils or forks from the canteen can become offensive weapons. Mum was physically smaller and much less strong than many of her pupils, and she worked there for many years, but she was never herself at any time physically confronted or put in danger. I think this has to be a poignant reflection of her character and her ability to understand and empathise with others, no matter what their background. The work there gave her a huge amount of satisfaction and fulfillment, and the children benefited enormously from their contact with her. As a teenager, Dad had attended Fruit Grammar School and had always harboured a wish to return to the West Country. He retired in 1976, and as Alan said, Mum and Dad moved to Bicknoller a couple of years or so later. They'd been in Bicknoller only 8 years and were barely settled in when Dad died. So, Mum was still only 62 years old and in good health. So knew that with a bit of luck, she still had a large part of her life ahead of her. So, what to do? To Mum, the most important thing in life was people. Her thoughts and daily life were always filled with consideration for people and how she might be able to improve their situation in some way. So she set about adjusting to her new life with the same calmness, maturity, and desire to give herself to the betterment and benefit of others. That was the fundamental basis of her character. Her calm demeanour and the interested look on her face when she spoke gave everyone she met the feeling they could talk openly to her, and that what they said was important and was being given the consideration it deserved. This made her a great bringing together of people, as is evidenced by this amazing number of people in this church today. And many of her family, and her neighbours, and her friends, and her acquaintances all benefited from this join with people that she managed to accomplish. She participated in many things, always with the aim of bringing benefit and happiness to others. She delivered Meals on Wheels. She worked as a volunteer for 7 years at the hospice down in Taunton. She participated in the Bicknoller lift scheme until discretion actually made her switch from driving to being driven. And she did a good spell at Bicknoller shop. She was always willing to give a helping hand, and the little things one did for the village of Bicknoller and that contributed to the well-being of her neighbours, I think, are legion, and well-known accomplishments. This might have been only a few words in the passing, or taking an active part in the community and community events. She regularly participated in the flower show, which I understand is this coming weekend. And she actually even won a couple of awards. She loved plays and acting, and was always ready to help the youngsters and some of the not so youngsters with their productions. By the time Mum left, and Alan had to empty her attic, it was chock-a-block full of the costumes and scenery she'd generated over the years, including several witches, their bonfire, and a complete St. George with his dragon. Despite chronic arthritis in her hands, that severely curtailed her activities in later life and that made rubbing and folding the mixture increasingly difficult and painful, I doubt there is anyone here who at some time, some probably more than once, has not benefited from the seemingly ever-present supply of her renowned scones, homemade jams, flapjack, and lemon drizzle cake. Producing this never-ending stream of goodies was something she liked to do, and it gave immense gastronomic pleasure to others. She was a friend to all, and had faith and trust in everyone. The door in Bicknoller, like in Edinburgh, was always open, even to total strangers. Some stayed only for a cuppa and a chat, and with a luck a scone or a piece of drizzle cake. Some ended up staying the night. Some borrowed her house for quite a lot longer. On one occasion, for example, a couple of Australian girls walked down off the quad tops and asked Mum if she knew if the pub had beds for the night. Mum said she didn't know, and they ought to go down and ask. But, as a throwaway comment, said, if they were stuck, they should come back and she would see if she could do anything. Sure enough, less than 10 minutes later, back they came. At which point, Mum invited them in, fed them, spent the evening having a wonderful chat by goodness knows what, gave them beds for the night, sold them off the next morning after feeding them breakfast. That was just the way she was. All families have stories to tell, and Mum's family is no exception. Mum was a youthful-looking young mother, and she was tickled by an incident that occurred on an Edinburgh bus one day, when she was taking Elspeth and me into town. She asked the conductor, "One or two halves to Princess Street, please?" Apparently the conductor gave her a quizzical, bemused look and said, "Who's the one?" Also while in Edinburgh, Mum and Dad bought a VW Caravanette, one of those quintessential originals favoured by the 1960s hippies, although Mum and Dad didn't actually have the flower paint job. It did have a kitchen and a hinge roof and an extra bed, and Mum and Dad enjoyed many a daytime mile and a nighttime rest in it. Dad frequently claimed that Mum's Mac-reading expertise when they were looking for a campsite for the night almost always led them up a dead-end road into a farmyard. Now, this almost certainly did happen, but maybe not quite as often as Dad would have had us believe. Mum was of an unflappable and thoughtful nature, and was the intermediary and peacemaker between Dad's more single-minded, but unfortunately normally justified, firmness, and the misdemeanours of their offspring. It wasn't just once that I escaped Dad's stern words, and even a clip around the lower, through Mum's timely intervention with a gentle, "It's all right, Ger, I'll talk to you this time." Thanks, Mum. Dogs always had a part to play in Mum's life. Before she was married, her then Sunday school teacher had a dog called Budge, and it's possible the time they spent out walking Budge was about the only private time they could find to do a bit of courting. While we were children living in Edinburgh, we had a Clare terrier called Brindy, who loved coming with us to leap over the heather, chase a frisbee, and enjoy a picnic on the many Sunday afternoons that we walked together in the hills around Edinburgh. When Mum and Dad moved to Lignala, they acquired Craig, a golden Labrador. Then, because my work was taking me overseas, Mum took care of our dog too, another golden Labrador. Exercising these two each day kept Mum both busy and fit. For my two children, Kirsty and Scott, who were at that time no more than 10 and 8 years old, what came to be known as the Great Dog Walks was one of the highlights of our regular family visits together. She would send Kirsty and Scott off round the village to collect Bodger and Jess, both black Labradors, Bonnie and Teddy, both golden retrievers, Mac, a bit of a mixture, but mainly collie, and together with Joss, another lively Labrador, the three of them, and 6 dogs go walking up the Quantons. Quite how our diminutive Mum and 2 young children managed to control 6 large and energetic dogs, I don't know. But somehow, Mum always managed to come back with the same number of dogs and children. I think Mum must have had a special way with animals as well as people. Latterly, when owning her own dog became just too much, she does that for others. Mum and Dad were always busy, both jointly and following their separate interests. But together, they'd not travelled widely outside the UK. When Dad died, Mum was presented with the chance to travel further afield, not only as a tourist, but also to follow her wish to join with real people and experience real situations, and if possible, and if the opportunity arose, to be of a helping hand. Elke Hottentot is a physiotherapist who one time was seconded by the United Nations to set up rehabilitation centres for victims of landmines in Cambodia. Elke really wanted to be here today, but she's currently in Vietnam, continuing with the same humanitarian work. Some years ago, Elke asked Mum if she would like to go out to Cambodia to see what Elke did. What did Mum do? No hesitation, off she went. She visited some of the rehabilitation centres and talked to some of the victims, many of whom were children who had just been playing in the fields, stepped in the wrong place, and lost a foot or a leg. While she was there, she found time to visit the Angkor Wat temple complex. She visited Uganda and saw the work that a couple who I believed, I'm not sure, were missionary teachers. She made an overnight stop in Cairo on her way to Kuwait, to visit nutritionally while I was working there. And she was met at the airport in Cairo by the Egyptian driver for the company I'd worked for. He was absolutely thrilled when, instead of taking her to a hotel, Mum being Mum accepted his invitation to go off with him to his house somewhere in the labyrinthian suburbs of Cairo and meet his wife. She visited Peru with Elspeth and family and had a wonderful time at Machu Picchu and Lake Titicaca. Unfortunately, the body surfing in the Pacific was a bit more challenging and left her just a bit the worse for wear. Mum's desire to do whatever she could to provide direct support to those that needed it was what initiated her most frequent overseas visits. I don't know how Mum first became involved with Valerie Taylor and CRP, the Centre for the Rehabilitation of the Paralysed in Bangladesh. Valerie really wanted to be here today, but unfortunately, due to ill health, just couldn't quite make it at the last minute. When Mum first went to CRP, it had not long been established by Valerie, and I believe was operating at a little more than some rented huts. It had virtually no money, no equipment, no facilities, and working conditions were, shall we say, a bit challenging. Over the years, Mum went out to CRP many times. Each time with a toothbrush and a few personal belongings squashed into a small shoulder bag. But also with a massive suitcase, packed with toys, books, games, and anything else Mum thought might bring some pleasure to the patients at CRP. The suitcase was always far too big for her to do by herself, but she did have this happy knack of galvanizing altruism in others, and was never short of offers for a helping hand to manhandle it through airports and in and out of a tuk-tuk. Mum was not medically trained, so spent her days doing whatever she could to make the lives of the patients there that little bit more bearable, even if this were merely by holding their hand and talking with them. Back in Big Northern, she continued to support these initiatives by doing what she could to spread public awareness and raise funds. I was talking to Mum once about how hard it is for individual people to change the world for the better. Mum's answer was that humanity is composed entirely of nothing other than individual people. So unless one of these individual persons got up and did something, nothing would even start to happen. In her own way, that's exactly what Mum did. And by doing it, she really did change the world by bringing a lot of happiness to a lot of people. Mum was not, in the conventional sense of following one particular creed, a religious person. And this despite her Scots Presbyterian background and the close attention she had paid to her Sunday school teacher. She did, though, hold a strong belief in a God, as epitomized by a spiritual opening of the heart, and belief that love, compassion, altruism, generosity, and truth between people comprise the essential parts of life's journey. Many years ago, while speaking about our respective personal beliefs, Mum said that if she were to be a follower of any particular religion, it might well have been Baha'i. Now, why Baha'i? Because in essence, the heart of Baha'i teaching closely reflects Mum's spiritualism, in that its goal is a unified world order that ensures the essential worth of all religions and the unity and social cohesion of all people. This is indeed what Mum believed and how Mum lived. Mum was truly an exceptional parent and a wonderful person. She gave so much, yet asked for so little. Mum, Joyce, we applaud you! I mentioned that Mum was a great bringer together of people, and she's still doing it here today, quite obviously. Mum's brother, Jim, lives in Toronto. He would like to have been here today, but at 96, very nearly 96 years old, he's rightly decided that his days of long-distance air travel are over. However, his 3 children, Ruth, Helen, and Ian, who also live in Toronto, and who constitute the sum total of our first cousins, to Elspeth, Alan and myself, have all made the trip over and are here with us. The 6 of us have of course all met in different places at different times, but if my memory serves me correctly, this is the first time ever that we have all been in the same place at the same time. That's quite a feat, Mum. Well done. Ian regularly made business trips to the UK. He came down to Peterborough to visit Mum as often as he could, and probably knows Mum as well as, if not better, than those people. So, in a few moments after the next hymn, I think Ian would like to say words. On behalf of myself, Elspeth, and Alan, and of course our Mum, I thank you all again for being here.
The other Ian. That was the Ian I was giving the wink to earlier. Help yourself.
So as Cousin Ian, or Big Ian as he was always known, because Little Ian said, I'm here to represent the MacKays, and thank you to the whole Halliday clan for including us in the service. Very touched by that. Here to represent, as he said, my 2 sisters who are here, Helen and Ruth, and unfortunately absent today, my father, Jim MacKay, Joyce's brother, and my mother, Laurie MacKay. But I do have a recording from my father, which, if technology works properly for me, I will be playing for everybody, with a remembrance that he has.
So this is my memory of Joyce. We were both born in Glasgow, as you probably know, and for a period after the family had moved to London, we went on a number of times back to Glasgow for vacations and to visit family and friends that we'd left behind. And one of the family was my father's father, Grandpa MacKay. And I remember he accompanied us on several trips on the Clyde steamers. This is what you did in Glasgow in those days. Day trips from the centre of the city down past the grime of the shipbuilding areas and out to the beautiful islands in the Firth. And then you maybe stayed for a few days at one of the seaside resorts that were serviced by the steamers. And Grandpa MacKay, as I remember, was an authority on all things nautical. He had, of course, spent his working life in the shipping industry. He could identify all the Clyde steamers at great distance and talk knowledgeably about triple expansion engines which powered the paddlers and which were very much on display in the traditionally open engine rooms, with their huge brass cranks and unique smell of hot oil. I think we 2 children spent more time in the engine rooms than that we did watching the scenery slip by. And then many years later, when Laurie and I arrived at Bicknoller, Joyce greeted me with the news that she had a treat for me. And you don't need me to tell you that Joyce was good at treats, and not just for small children and dogs. Anyway, the treat for me was that the only surviving Clyde-built paddle steamer, the PS Waverley, was coming to Minehead in a couple of days' time. And she had 3 tickets for a trip along the coast to Lynmouth. So off we went to Minehead and boarded the Waverley for the trip to Lynmouth. I remember there was no dock at Lynmouth that could take the Waverley, so we had to jump off the paddle boxes onto a small boat to take us to shore. And Joyce, of course, managed that leap pretty well, as I remember. The shoreline in that area is, of course, quite spectacular, and most of the passengers were happily hanging over the port, I suppose it would be, the port railings, looking at the scenery. But 2 little old white-haired people spent most of the trip down in the engine room, watching the cranks go round and round, and inhaling the smell of hot oil, and reliving their childhood on the Clyde.
That was an unexpected break. That must have been the sound of the machinery on the Clyde's team. And I have a very few words from my mother as well. So this is from my mother, Laurie MacKay, Joyce's sister-in-law. I'll be thinking of you all today, and I can visualize the scene in Bicknoller with Joyce's family and friends celebrating her very eventful life in the village where she was so happy. I miss her. We were sisters-in-law for 63 years, and I like to think very good friends. During many visits over the years, Joyce and I would always find time to have long, philosophical discussions or girl talk well into the wee hours after everyone else had gone to bed. This was our time together. We set the world aright, as we like to believe. You will all have special, very special memories of Joyce, your own special memories, or Auntie Joyce, as she was known to her Canadian family. She touched so many lives. Our memories will keep her with us. And just to add a little bit from Ruth, Helen, and I, we could not have asked for a more wonderful auntie.
As many of you know about my granny, she had so many poems memorized. She could just recite them. And when she left this, she hand wrote it out to be read here today. And I was looking, I couldn't figure out a couple words of the writing, and I looked it up. And she got every word perfect. I looked it up on Google, which I'm sure is not what she did. It was just amazing. It's just a memory of mine, how many poems she could just recite. So here's one that she asked me today. To those I love and those who love me. When I am gone, release me. Let me go. I have so many things to see and do. You must not tie yourself to me with tears. Be happy that we had so many years. I gave you my love, and you can only guess how much you gave me in happiness. I thank you for the love you each have shown, but now it is time that I travel alone. So grieve a while for me, if you must, but then let your grief be comforted by trust. It is only for a while that we must part, so bless the memories within your heart. I won't be far away, for life goes on. So if you need me, call, and I will come. Though you can't see or touch me, I will be near. And if you listen with your heart, you will hear all my love around you, soft and clear. And then when you must come this way alone, I will be there to greet you with a smile and a welcome home.
Thank you, that was lovely. Just like to thank everybody who's contributed to this wonderful service, and particularly I know it can be quite emotional and difficult, so thank you so much for your bravery in sharing your memories of a dearly loved person. And so may the infinite and glorious Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, direct our life in good works, and after our journey through this world, grant us eternal rest with all the saints. Amen.
Amen.